Well, for coming out and showing interest in this project. As Jennifer said, it's really new to me. The first time I've done an outdoor sculpture, that was Nature as Muse. And it involves an ancient process called the lost wax process. I at first thought that was referring to the fact that it was a lost process and they didn't know how to do it anymore, and we're just kind of fumbling through the best we can now. But actually it's not. It's the lost wax process is something that was invented maybe 2,500 years ago by the ancient Greeks. Has been in continuous use since then, and anything I figure that's 2,500 years old is probably still going to be used 2,500 years from now. There's still going to be people using this process. It's a fascinating process. Has many steps. I think it maybe has 7 steps of what Betsy, my wife Betsy, calls creative destruction. It's a process where one thing is made and then destroyed so that the next stage can come into being. So we put this together for you, but before I start, I want to make some more introductions. You probably know these two people, Mary Cascio on the left and Betsy Bryden on the right. And I just want to say that this project would never have happened without those two. It turns out that Betsy's grandparents, who came here, well, they built a house here 120 years ago on the Little Moose Lake. They fell in love with the natural surroundings. Incidentally, the Mallinckrodts were also avid art collectors, so it fits in both senses. Nature and art were part of their lives. When Betsy was about 11 or 12 years old, she showed interest in the arts. And her grandmother said, no, we're going to take you into town and introduce you to Mrs. Cascio, and she's going to show you how to do clay. And that was going to be the beginning. And Betsy, by the way, is still doing clay. She's a very good ceramicist, and she has done many pots. And so that was the beginning of a more than 50-year friendship, I think, going way back. And so I want to thank both of you. It wouldn't have happened without you. And I also want to introduce Gary Mallinckrodt. He's standing right here by the machine. Gary is the grandson of these two people who are being honored by the Mallinckrodt Garden. And Gary has really, in a collaborative effort, put together this video with many hours as a tribute to his grandparents, he said. Has put together this video that I hope you will enjoy. And I hope you don't mind if I forget a few things. Gary knows everything I'm supposed to say, so he will maybe have to prompt me a few times as we go along. So we will start. We start with a video. And this video is a spot on Little Moose Lake that I think is very important to the story. So I want you to take it in and remember. This is called the outlet of Little Moose. The natural surroundings, the stones, the water moving, the pines. This is what inspired the elder Mallinckrodts to build their house here. So this stops about here. The fact is, I've been a painter for maybe 30 years, and I've known all along that nature is the first teacher of artists. Artists begin by looking at nature, and that's how they decide what they're going to do, what they're going to present. So for me, the idea of nature as muse was a natural. And when the garden started, and I had this idea of a bronze statue that I was going to put in there, the concept really came as a complete idea just from the name alone. Nature is our muse. And that's probably unusual because a lot of artworks, we don't know where they started. We don't know what was the beginning of an artwork. But in this case, we can say very confidently it was because of the name. The name came first. So the thing that had to happen was to draw it. Because I figured if I can draw it it's going to happen. I don't have any confidence that something is going to happen unless I've sketched it out. So I began by the sketch on the right was the very first concept. I had this girl in mind. She was going to be sort of like a forest nymph. I couldn't figure out exactly what she was doing, but I did drawings of her standing on rocks. I did drawings of her with different poses. The bird began to come into it. That was Betsy's suggestion. I hadn't any idea what she would be reaching for. We did more sketches using a model who would come in, a live model. I would come in and do drawings from a live model, working on different poses. But as I was working along, I began to realize I had to really resolve this pose in a way that would be a 3D pose. And so we have Betsy on the right. Betsy is a retired dancer, and she came up with a brilliant suggestion of how to come up with a pose that you could see from 360 degrees, that you could walk around it and you would never feel like one view was the only real view that you were supposed to see it from. She said, how about a spiral that would start from the left heel and go all the way through the body and come up and go through the fingertips as one long 360 degree spiral. So Betsy was the very first inspiration. This is, by the way, she's standing on one of the rocks in the old parking lot circled, so that we had this idea really from the very earliest of what it was going to look like. So we went on and did more drawings. The drawings are piling up. They began to wonder what she was going to be wearing. Is she going to be a woodland nymph with practically nothing on, or was she going to have a very chaste Grecian woman's outfit? I didn't know. But the drawings went on and on. Here are some ideas for how she might be clothed. Finally, I was getting pretty close to starting, but I didn't have the character of the person. So I met, at just about this time, I met a girl from England named Georgie Smith, and she seemed to me to have just the right face. So I began to do portrait studies of her. She had this kind of innocent and inquiring look. I did her with different expressions and different poses. I was beginning to get more confident of who she was and who Muse was. And everything was getting pretty settled. There was still a few questions. This is going to be a bird, and I had gone to the Museum of Natural History to study birds in flight. These are stuffed birds that I drew. But then it occurred to me, this is the Adirondacks, and I've got to have a bird. There are going to be people there who are going to know what kind of bird should be in the Adirondacks. And so I finally settled on the northeastern bluebird. These are some sketches of the northeastern bluebird. It turns out this is Disney's favorite bird because in Cinderella and so forth, it's the bluebird that shows up. And I found out why. It's because the bluebird has a large head and small wings, and it looks very friendly and very approachable. And which was fine with me because the bluebird has an impeccable character. He's not a little bit shady, a little bit loose like some of the other birds. So I adopted the northeastern bluebird, and I knew that I better have that pretty accurate because there are a few bird experts here that could tell me any anomalies that I might have had. So I did a series of sketches of got quite expert on the northeastern bluebird. So then finally, there's one more sketch to be done. Actually, this is a photograph of this. I call it a sketch because it is really in 3 dimensions, a translation of what I was thinking in the drawings. And it was so important to do this because you have to be able to visualize all the different aspects of it, and you never can do that in drawings alone. So this is a sketch, a 3-dimensional sketch. And in addition to using it as a 360-degree viewing tool, I had it cast in bronze so that it would be the same color and coated in wax so it would have the same look. So this was getting awfully close to what I knew I wanted to do. Everything now is pretty settled. That's the pose, that's the material, that's the color, that's the patina that I wanted.
So then we start to think, how are we going to translate this into the next stage? It turns out that 300 or 400 pounds of clay will not stand up by itself, so you need something called an armature. It says wire armature there, but it actually is made out of pipes and wire and aluminum mesh. So here I am twisting and putting together all the little pieces. This is my studio in New York. I'm putting together all the little pieces, and this would have been impossible to do if I didn't have the little maquette, because I could turn it and then put the maquette in the same position and then check to make sure all the lines are the same, because once you get those pipes in there and once you have clay on those pipes, there's no chance of moving them. You just have to start over again if you've made a mistake. So I have to say that this took me quite a bit of time. This is a special design of a carol. I went to architecture school, so I had a little bit of design practice. This is a carol that I designed to hold her upright, and I had wheels put on the bottom so that I could move her around so that she would always be in just the right light. And I put her on a kind of a lazy Susan so that I could turn her, so I'd have an unobstructed view of her from all angles. Now, this process took about 2 months, and I'm beginning to think, this is really going to be a huge project. 2 months just to get this far in. What have I got? But here I'm finished, and I'm ready to start putting on the clay. I'm using something called Hugo Gray water-based clay. It's really just something they dig out of the ground. It's a very common material. And I put it onto the wire frame. I have the model come in every day, and so I'm checking the anatomy against the model. And I'm beginning to see things change fast. Now, on the right, she's almost finished, and I did her without clothes on because I wanted the structure under the clothes to be exactly right before I had any issue with folds and things like that. So here she is on the right, almost finished. Surprisingly enough, this only took a few weeks. After having spent months making that wire structure, here I am 2 weeks later with something that looks like a statue. But of course, there's still a lot of issues to be resolved. The next issue is what kind of clothing. And I had the idea of taking swaths of real cloth and draping it onto the clay statue in ways that would suggest a dress. And this is the perfect solution. I could try one thing. If I didn't like it, I would try something else. I had dozens of tries. And then finally, this was getting pretty close. I would photograph the results, compare the photographs at the end, redraw them. I had drawings of all of the different variations. I would redraw them, and then this is when I have to do something. I have to take the cloth off and remember enough about what I had there to reproduce it in clay. And all I had were the photographs and the drawings. So it really was a memory exercise to get to the same place that the actual cloth material was at. Of course, there was the bluebird, and he came separate. He's always been separate. I would make these little bluebirds and perch her up in the hand of Muse, and they were never stuck up there strong enough, and they would, one after another, fall down, land on the ground, and get smashed, and I'd have to start up another bluebird. So I think this is bluebird number 6 or something like that. But he's beginning to get modeled too in clay. There's the model, Georgie, and she's standing next to Muse. That was a great day when I realized that we were pretty much finished. You can see, she's a beautiful girl, and you can see why she inspired that sculpture. So now, before we get into the next series of slides, what has to happen next is a process called a waste mold. And you have to think of making a mold like 2 clamshells going around the sculpture. And those clamshells are going to be pried apart at some point. And then that will be the record of the sculpture. So I had the appointment made with a group called Sculpture House Casting, and they came to my studio one morning early, 3 men crew. They came in, set up all their equipment, started mixing plaster, and then started making what's called a waste mold. We have a few pictures. This is the making of the plaster waste mold. You can see that my studio now has been transformed. You hardly recognize it. It's covered with plastic. You see that's Raymond and Joe and Wilfredo. And these guys have been doing this for, I don't know, as long as I've been a painter, they've been doing this, and they are so expert. I had this real hesitation because every artwork I've done before this, I've had complete control. I start it, I finish it, I frame it, I put it on the wall, nobody else touches it. And this is the first time when I've had to trust somebody else. I can't do this, and it's in their hands. I had to give it over to them. It's like sending your child off to paint or something, I don't know. So we're going to go to a little video that shows you the actual process. This is Raymond, and he has to keep the clay wet. He sprays it constantly with water, and the clay is kept soft. And what you're seeing there is called shims. These are thin metal strips of metal. Why do I have no pointer? Oh. These are thin strips of metal that are pressed into the clay, and they divide the front from the back, so you have two halves of the clamshell. Raymond carefully fits these into, you see the kind of accordion shape they have. That is so that the two halves can be keyed to each other. By that ragged shape, they will only fit one way together. Raymond has to cover the figure all the way from top to bottom. There you see it going all the way around, all the way down to the feet. He has to cover the figure all the way from top to bottom into two halves. The floor was covered with special material. The walls had to be covered. Here he is securing the shims so that they won't move around. So Joe Ruggiero is doing more shims. Had that three-man crew work together seamlessly doing this. It was the whole thing was done in a few hours. This is the process called flinging the clay. With a loose wrist action, you just dip the wet clay and throw it at the wet plaster and throw it at the clay. And it would cover it in a thin coating and go into every little nook and cranny and exactly reproduce what was there. And strangely, there's one detail here. You'll notice that the plaster has been dyed purple. And I'll explain to you later why that is so important. But this very thin coating of plaster has a purplish color to it. So we'll finish watching them put on. They just really, that's really hard to do. I tried to do that and I couldn't do it. Here they are cleaning off the edges of the shims. That's that purplish colored plaster. They're making sure that those shim edges are still going to be visible because that's the most important part of the mold. After that, after those that are cleaned up, burlap is soaked in plaster and pressed against the mold. The burlap is going to reinforce that plaster because plaster by itself, will crumble. And the burlap gives it a tension resistance. So he's patting in lots and lots of burlap. Now the burlap is in white plaster, and so that's different from the purple plaster. Then, as an additional reinforcement, we have pipes that are bent just to the exact shape, expertly bent, put against the plaster, and they will be used for extra strength because there absolutely must not be any movement. Right there you see the strips of burlap that are holding the pipes against the plaster. It is absolutely rigid and now getting quite heavy. Now, before this picture starts, the men have gone off for lunch, and they are coming back in about 3 hours. That is enough time for the plaster to cure. When they come back, they take a hatchet, that's what he's holding there, and chops away the plaster to expose as much of that that shim that you see right there as possible, so that the two halves of the clamshell can be pulled apart. The first part that's going to be done in the video is going to be the head. The back of the head right there, which is reinforced, is going to be pulled away from the main sculpture. So you'll see that in the video. Here's Joe. He's trying it, and there comes the back of the head off. Now, right there is the clay sculpture. That's my months and months of work of molding a clay sculpture, armature, everything. Those little curls right there, lovingly done, they are no longer necessary. It's putting them away. We don't need those anymore. And there's the arm. They're prying it apart with chisels. They very gently go in there, wiggle it apart. Two halves will come off. This is a delicate moment because I wasn't prepared for it. That arm is not necessary anymore. They're just going to pull it off, and they're going to cut it off. This is brutally, as you can imagine. There you go. Really. And so we continue. This goes one step at a time. Here he is cleaning out the back of these. In the background, you'll see Wilfred walking away with one of the plaster casts. He is taking them down to a truck, waiting on the street. There he goes. And those sections, I think there were about 10 of them, those sections will be, you want to stop it there? Those sections will be taken to Sculpture House Casting in Manhattan and used for making the next stage. Here we are with the very last bit of clay coming out, started again. And this is the mesh again. And then you see, that's all that remains of Muse. It's the ghostly image of Muse stuck in reverse in the plaster. It looks totally different. It looks like maybe a Renaissance saint or something. That is all I have left of Muse. I have to trust now that they're going to be able to reproduce her somehow. That's the section of the. So now, this is what they call the break mold, and the break mold is taken in sections in Manhattan in the Fashion District in the 20s on the west side. There's a very old building. I think it's probably 150 years old, and in the basement of this building are a group of people who are making sculptures, and who knew that they're making plaster and bronze statues in the basement of a building in the Fashion District of Manhattan. We're going to go to the stage called Making the Plaster Positive. And this man in the next slide is mixing up in the basement of Sculpture House Casting. He's mixing up the plaster and the burlap. What's going to happen is these sections have been laid out on tables. Each of the sections has been washed and cleaned. Let's stop it a minute. Each one has been scrubbed of all the clay, dried with an air hose, and then a bit of soapy substance has been put on the surface, all over the whole surface, to act as an isolation or a resist, so that the next layer of plaster will not adhere to the form. So there we are. On the right, he is pouring, or in the left, I'm sorry, he's pouring in the plaster, and then on the right, they show them rotating the mold around so that the plaster will go everywhere in about a half-inch. I'll be back. Okay. In about a half-an-inch thickness all over, sort of like the way you would rotate a pie tin or something like that, to make sure that it's completely covered with substance. That's what they're doing with these huge molds. Then have to take a brush to get in all the little nooks and crannies, because sometimes that's not quite enough. So he's brushing the plaster into the small parts of the form. That plaster statue is not going to be strong enough to stand on its own, so a wire reinforcing is put in, pressed into the plaster. That wire has to be coated with more burlap soaked in plaster to adhere it to the outer shell. So that's what he's doing there. there's more burlap so that they cover the rods entirely. And now they're ready for the next step. They're bringing over, here's one piece, they're bringing over the other piece, and they're going to put them together, both halves of the sculpture. This is looking at it from the bottom. That's the base of the sculpture. They're reinforcing it with metal. And he's cleaning it up so that it'll stand flat on the floor without rocking. And then we have, well, the final touches. I'm going to go through this quickly. This is just the final clamping of the sculpture. And then we have her lying like a mummy. Inside this mold is a plaster statue. You'd never know, but inside that is a plaster statue. So she's going to cure for a few days. The next stage, it is a waste mold, and so we're going to find out why they call it a waste mold. You have to get rid of that. So the next slide shows the worker unclamping the figure, and with the Sawzall machine, he's cutting away the rods and the pipes that were holding her together. Remember when they put them on? With a chisel, he's knocking off the different pieces. He even takes a hatchet and slams away at this burlap. This is another stage in the creative destruction, and it's brutal. Now, it looks like, to me, I think maybe to you, it looks like he's carving a statue out of a mess. But what he's really doing is taking away all the white plaster, and he's now gotten down to the purple plaster. And the purple plaster tells him he has to be super careful, because any slip of a chisel, anything that he does is going to make a mark that will not be easily replaced. So he is very carefully cutting her down into the original. He's not sculpting her, he's actually just taking away everything from the waste mold. That's why we call them waste mold. So she's going to sit there. Now, this goes, is there another slide? Is this the last one? Okay, so this process goes all the way down to the feet. Everything is taken away, and we have a plaster statue there. That plaster statue is put into a van and taken to my studio. So here we have the plaster statue in my studio. This was the original clay form, now turned into plaster, sitting in my studio, and I have the job ahead of me is to take out all these blemishes, to smooth out all the transitions, to add details in the eyes and the ears. Everything that I couldn't quite do in the clay, the wet clay is a little tricky, I'm going to do now in the plaster. So here I am with special tools grinding away on the plaster. I had the model come several more times just for references. It was a process that took maybe another month. Just getting it down. This is brushing away the excess material. This is a small tool called a riffler, a very sharp tool that you can go into the smallest little crevices and smooth out the plaster. Now, this is the finished plaster in my studio, and you notice that she doesn't have it on. And that's because when they transport the figure, having a 7-foot arm sticking out there is not any good at all. So they made it a removable arm, and I have the arm. It has a little thing that would slide into her shoulder, and a hole for a pin that would go through. The pin is right there. And so I put the figure together and checked everything so it was just what I wanted. And now she gets wrapped up and put in the truck again and taken back to Sculpture House Castings basement in the fashion district. The next stage is called the rubber mold. I'm going to talk about the rubber mold a little bit. This is what now stage, what are we at? 3 or 4? The rubber mold is a really different kind of stage. First was the destruction of the clay, then there was the destruction of the waste mold. The reason why you need a rubber mold is when you pull two rigid parts away from each other, they're going to do some damage to the thing inside, because there's going to be a little bit of a grip or a little bit of something that's going to grab the inside and do damage to it. It didn't matter with the first step because we were going to throw the clay away anyway, so whatever damage that was done, didn't matter. Didn't matter in the second step because we were going to smash the outside anyway, so we didn't have to worry about what kind of damage we might make by pulling it away from the sculpture. But now we come to the rubber mold because we want to keep both the shell and we want to keep what's inside it. So we're going now, this is what happens next. This is the sculpture in the basement, and she's being covered with about an inch of clay all the way up. And we're going to repeat the whole process that we did through the shims. We're going to repeat the whole process with the burlap, with the plaster. We're going to repeat with the pipes. She's going to go right back into being in a shell again. That's what they're doing, they're putting on the shell. After the shell is dry, they are going to pull it apart. Here they are, it's going to come apart, two halves. And what you have inside is going to be the sculpture covered with clay. And they pull her out, they get rid of all that clay, they wash out the forms, they take the sculpture, and put the forms back on her. But now where the clay was, it's going to be air. And where that air was, it's going to be turned into rubber. You can see the space between her face and the form, and that's going to be the rubber mold that goes between the two. They have to carefully position her so they don't hurt her when they put back the shell. There she is disappearing once again. And here they are pouring liquid rubber into the spouts. The rubber is going to dry. And when they pull the plaster off, we have this. This is Muse covered in rubber and looking sort of like a chocolate bunny, which is probably a good analogy because later I'll explain why chocolate bunnies are hollow and bronze statues are hollow for the same reason. The rubber is pulled apart very carefully. The two sections are pulled apart. And there's Muse in plaster inside. Now, those rubber pieces are going to be fitted back into the plaster and permanently affixed to the plaster. So now you have a rigid structure, a flexible structure, both put together permanently. So now we're ready for the next stage, which is called the wax stage. The wax stage, remember this is the lost wax process. And the concept here is that everywhere that there's wax, there's going to be bronze. The wax will be replaced by bronze. Here is the form. That's the plaster. That's the rubber. And he's pouring in wax right there. He's ladling it in to the thickness that he wants the bronze to be. It is about, I would think, about 3/8 of an inch thick. Muse weighs 280 pounds, I think 285 pounds. It's 285 pounds of bronze, which is about something like $3,000 worth of bronze. So you don't want it to be too thin because you don't want it to break, but you don't want it to be too thick because it's going to cost you a lot of money. So they wait until the wax is dried. And then the wax forms are taken out of the rubber. The rubber won't hurt them, of course, because it's flexible. And the pieces are put together back into the statue, and there they are putting it back into the statue. All the little pieces are put on, and I'm making the final check. This is Sal Parada here, who is showing off the figure. Sal is the owner of Sculpture House Castle. And so at this stage we go to the next. And the next stage is just as brutal as everything that's happened before. She is sent to a foundry outside of New York City. You can't have a bronze foundry inside New York City, so she is moved out to a place in Long Island called Elliott Gant's Foundry. And Elliott Gant sees this wax sculpture and he chops her into little pieces. And the wax pieces are going to be the right size to receive just the right amount of bronze. You can't pour the whole bronze sculpture. You have to do it in pieces because you need to have the coherence of the material. It can't be too big or you wouldn't have the coherence. This is in a windowless room in Elliott Gantz's foundry. This is a tank filled with ceramic material, constantly stirred so it's always liquid. And the next slide shows that the workers are going to dip the wax into this ceramic material, take it out, let it dry for a day, redo it, and for 30 times they're going to do that. For 30 days they dip it until it gets thicker and thicker. Now this strange thing is the wax, and the reason why you don't recognize it is because of these tubes. These tubes represent the channels by which the bronze is going to flow to the form. These are called screws, and you need enough of them for the bronze to get to the form all at the same time. And then of course you have the funnel at the top. This is what it looks like after that's been dipped in the ceramic 30 times. The next slide shows Elliott Gantz showing off 2 pieces of Muse. This is probably Muse's 2 thighs, we don't know for sure. And you can see how thick the material has come. Now, these 2 pieces, the next step is for these pieces to go into an oven. The oven is heated, and all the wax, which was still inside, all the wax just drips out. So now you have a ceramic shell with the void where the wax used to be, a pretty strong ceramic shell. Those shells are assembled onto a cart. This is a steel cart with sand on the bottom so that it will hold them upright. And it is wheeled into the furnace room, another windowless room. Here are the workers bringing a cauldron of molten bronze out of the floor furnace. They're wearing the thermal suits because this is very hot in this room. And they are bringing it over on a special hoist with bar control. They tilt this thing. This is all done by hand, and also it's very skillful work. The pour has to be just the right speed. Too fast and it'll flow over the top. Too slow and it might cool and not form the joint with the next amount of bronze. So they're pouring at a steady pour. Oh, at one point, a crack opened in the ceramic. What's going to happen? They can't stop, so they keep pouring. But luckily, that crack, which looks pretty terrible, turned out to not be very important at all. So that was lucky. I'm going to show you a video of how this process looks in real time. There's the cauldron. They're coming over with the hoist, and they attach it to the cauldron. They bring up with these handles. It's like it's a very hand-controlled sort of process. They wheel it over to the cart where the cart was. Here's the molten metal coming out. The molten metal is being poured into the funnel, and it's going right down into the form. This is not changed for 2,500 years. So we're going to go to the next process. Muse, of course, it's in pieces now. She's been told. The pieces have to have the ceramic material knocked off. So the ceramic material has been knocked off these pieces. They've cooled, and they're sitting on a table. And the process called chasing begins. Here's Muse, there's Muse's head, there's her body. There is Muse with her arm welded on to the body. There's Muse with her feet welded onto the base, her legs welded onto the base by the feet. Here's another weld, the head going onto the body. This strange patch right here, that refers to the fact that sometimes all the ceramic material in the inside doesn't come out. And they had to cut a hole in the bronze and dig inside and knock all the ceramic material loose. Now, the screws have been knocked off. Everything's been polished down. Here she is. That's Muse waiting for the next step. The next step, of course, is the bird. And the bird has been done separately. But the question is, how is the bird going to be attached? So we're looking at Muse. I'm trying to find out the right position for the bird. And then both Muse and the bird are taken away to the arc welder. He's preparing it. And then he's going to take out the arc welder, put her on there. After that's hardened, they send it to another worker who grinds away the excess material. And now you have Muse looking like a golden goddess. Too bad that she couldn't stay that way, but it turns out that bronze has no resistance to corrosion, and she would turn all green and pitted with a very short time. This little thing right here is an example you can see later of what the bronze looks like before it has a patina. And this is only maybe about a month old, and already she's starting to get dull and tarnished. That's Muse. She's out in Long Island. We're going to put her in a van, and we're going to take her back to Sculpture House casting for the patina. The patina is an artistic process. There's Sal. Sal is as much an artist as anybody else. He's been doing this for a long time. Sal has coated the figure with acid, and now he's trying different colors of acid on top of the base acid to see if we can get the right color. Here's an experiment with a kind of a brownish color. It turned out we wanted something a little bit greener. And Sal takes a blowtorch, he heats up the metal, and then the acid congeals into the metal, so the patina is really fire struck onto the metal. Sal is asking me, now is this the right color? He brushes on a little bit more acid. Is this the right color? If it's yes, then he blowtorches it, and you can see how there's a little bit of variety of colors throughout the thing. But after I've given my approval, he tries to make the whole sculpture the same color. From head to toe, he goes with the blowtorch and with the brushes, he goes all the way down to the feet, making the sculpture one color. And so we let Muse cool off. There she is. That's the color she's going to be. She's cooling off, and when she's cool, she'll be coated in wax, and she'll be put in our car, and we're going to drive her to View, which has been waiting for the installation. Waiting patiently. I have to say this was going to open on July 6th, and we arrive on July 3rd with the sculpture, so everybody was really relieved to finally see her come into the driveway. The installation, I want to have you recall that video at the beginning, the rocks and the water and the trees and everything. We had a very talented landscape designer, that's Britt Basinger from Saratoga Associates. We took Britt over to that spot. That was one of the favorite spots of the Mallinckrodts. Said, this is our concept, this is our inspiration. And Britt took it all in, and he came up with this scheme of having a little pond, having it rocks around it, surrounded by wildflowers and trees, and then a path, a kind of a ceremonial path that would go right by it and lead right up to the door of View. I think it was a brilliant idea, kind of like a little ceremonial approach to the temple that is View.
Whatever.
We just got back from Greece, so we know that the approach to a building is just as important as the building. Here they are, they're making the pond. Now here raises another issue. We thought that we were just going to move these boulders around, no problem. We would pick one nice small boulder, we'd set Muse on top of it, and we'd be finished. But when we tried to move that boulder, it goes way down to the ground. It is a 30-ton boulder, and that meant we had no choice. We had to put the Muse on top of that boulder. Everything else had to be worked around that. That boulder wasn't going anywhere. So that's the edge of the pond. And there's the plastic being put in. You know, I thought that my artistic input was finished when I had done the sculpture, but it turns out I really wanted those boulders to be in just the right place. And I was making life difficult for those machine operators. But I want that moved a couple of inches this way. Maybe we could turn it this way. And they were very patient. That was a day's work for them. There they are moving the last of the boulders around. And here I am showing, my gosh, we need to take off that much of that boulder just to get a place where Muse can sit. That's a lot of granite. And granite is really hard. Luckily, we found a granite sculptor. His name is Matt Horner, and he loves to cut granite. He came all the way over to Old Forge.
He's from Keene.
He's from Keene, yes, okay. Matt said, yes, I can do that. And he brought along his 70-pound diamond saw, started slicing through the top of that rock. With every half inch, he would do another slice. And then he would hit them with a hammer and knock them off. In the background, you see the walkway coming through. They were simultaneously doing the walkway and the rock. Every once in a while, a little piece of rock would go over onto the walkway and have to rush over and brush it off, so it wouldn't become a permanent part of there he is posing off the walkway. Matt got that top down. I don't know how he did it. We brought out a structure, and then we're ready to bring out Muse. Muse is all wrapped and stayed inside Muse for a couple of days. Here comes Muse. We walk her out. That's Carrie Rogers. They're supervising the installation. Carrie is taking off the blanket. We're going to see for the first time what does Muse look like. Here we have Jennifer and Matt and Linda and Amy? Joy and Dawn and David and Alan and...
Oh, that looks like Becca. She's one of our interns.
And
Elise.
And that's Elise. Yeah. They all came out and they said, okay, just a little bit this way. There they are, and that's the position she's going to be. So we mark the holes for her, and Matt comes and drills into the stone right where the holes are. You see him going down with this big drill. He's going about 8 or 10 inches down into that stone. You see the pegs, yeah. There's one of the pegs. He had to go down quite far. Here's Muse being held up by a bucket loader, ready to be tilted back up again. Matt is cleaning off this, doing the last minute adjustments so that Muse will sit pretty solid without rocking back and forth. And it's ready. The bucket loader brings her over, positions her. Okay, pick her up again. We have Carrie putting in the epoxy into each one of the holes. And that means it's going to be there for 200 years. When she gets dropped down again, she's finished. That's finished. And so then the landscaper arrives. He's got all the wild plants, all the plants that are in the garden now. They're unloading trees, nice big trees. The sod came the same day. They're undoing a very hot day. It was amazing that sod did well. But the ground was marked with white circles where all the trees were going to go. And we're ready for the ceremony. We're almost at the end. This was a really terrific day. This was a wonderful day. We had, here's a kind of like a bulletin board that they made for the installation. That is Betsy's grandmother, Elizabeth, and Gary's grandmother, and that is Edward. And so to open the ceremonies, we had Betsy's cousin, Mark Funk, play the bagpipes. The procession was led by the Yelt's grandchildren. They came over, the speeches were made. This is probably a good time to thank Jennifer and to thank Carrie because of all the logistics that were the hurdles that were necessary to get past to get us here. They ironed everything out. There were so many things to be ironed out. Here's Betsy giving her speech. And we're really at the end. The ribbon is going to be cut by these adorable children. I think there it is. It's cut. and the final publicity photo, and we're done. we have a little video of what Muse looks like now, and you're all familiar with this, but I think it's sort of a nice little ending to the talk. I think that the Mallinckrodt seniors, Edward and Elizabeth, would have been really pleased with this. So if you want to ask any questions, I'd be glad to answer them, and then
they're on.
and then we will go to the lottery drawing. So any questions? Any questions?
Start to finish, time.
First concept took about a year, I think, from the first sketches to the finishing the maquette. The maquette came here and stayed all summer, a year before this, 2 years ago. And then when we knew that that was going to happen, it was a year until it was finished. So 2 years, we'll say. That's pretty fast as these sculptures go, apparently. Yeah. Yes.
Did your heart skip a lot of beats when they were working on these pieces?
It was, and the worst moment was when they dug out that clay. You know, really, that was the first time I've ever seen my work destroyed. It just never occurred to me that was going to happen. And I felt so vulnerable. But as I said I think I said to the newspaper, it really taught me as an artist to trust other people, because an artist really is used to just trusting themselves. They are all they have. But a sculptor, a bronze sculpture, you have to trust. I had to trust 20 people to do that right. And they did it, yes.
The process between the clay and the plaster was just so that you could get back at and smooth it out for the bronze?
Yes, yeah. Some people omit that plaster stage and make a rubber right from the clay. But I wanted to refine it to get all those little bumps and things. Some people like that rough look, you know. You see it sometimes where you can still see the fingerprints and so forth. But that wasn't my style, so I wanted to take that plaster and make it as smooth as possible.
Did you do a lot of research to find certain companies that you wanted to?
Yeah, you know, as it turned out, the company I had in mind, I went to them and they said, "Oh, we've had a death in the family and you'll have to wait until October till we can do it." And I said, "Oh, no, we can't do that. We can't do that to view." And so we had to scramble to get, Elliot Gantz took it, he took it quite quickly. We're really appreciative of that. I still prefer the other foundry and I'll use them in the future, but it wasn't our first choice. I learned a lot about the bronze process. I don't think there's anything. I went online looking in Google and there are lots of little videos that show you one aspect of it or another, but I couldn't find anything that showed you how a statue goes from start to finish, from the very first idea of the artist to when people are standing there and cutting the ribbon. So that's probably. I'm thinking that Gary is going to figure out a way to put it on the internet, and that people will be able to, not just around here, but everywhere will be able to see it. Yeah, Beth?
Can you say a little something about Sculpture House? Because that was a first try, and it was a real match for your sculpture group.
Sculpture House has been in existence for, I don't know, 50 years, I guess. And when I first went to them, they were so encouraging, and because I was brand new to sculpture, and they really walked me through. I can't imagine what it would have been like if they hadn't been so encouraging. They said, "No, this is going to work, Louis. No, don't. You can trust us. No, everything's going to be okay." I mean, I was as nervous as you can imagine, and it all worked out. Now we're really terrific friends. Sal Carrata, I consider a family friend, and we still working together. He does all my work for me now. So, yeah.
I own a couple of bronze sculptures, and frankly, I'm astonished at how ignorant I have been about what people creating. Well, one is one of these Brooklyn Bronco ones. Is that the same process?
Same process. There is another process called French sand casting, but most likely what you have is done by the lost wax. It's at least 80% of the sculptures are done by the lost wax process.
One almost thinks it was simpler like Lanford, the simple.
Well, making stone, it's interesting, when we were in Greece, we always think of Greek sculpture as being marbles, right? But the Greeks didn't consider marble sculpture. That was just trash. That was backyard trash. They considered the bronze as the real thing. If you wanted to have a sculpture, you had a bronze. And all of the sculptures we have now are just stone copies of the bronzes. So that process was extremely valuable, and it was worth all the trouble that they went to. Yeah, really.
What did they use for rubber in the early?
They didn't have rubber, of course, and what they had was animal skin glues, which they would have made into a kind of a gelatin. And so that would do the same thing. But the only problem with the animal skin glues is they would dry over time, so they could only make one. They only could make one. Now, as Jennifer was very dismayed to find out, I could make another Muse. I have the mold in the face of the sculpture. Not that I think that I'm going to be able to do it, but it's a possibility.
What was the fine detailing? I mean, certainly the metal came from Sculpture House in a nice way, but your artist sense must have
Details, fingernails, toenails, those sort of things. I wanted to get them exactly, and in plaster I did them exactly. But when they came back from the foundry, even they weren't quite right. So I had to grind them with special grinders in the bronze to make them more to my liking. But that's the kind of detail: eyelids, lips, nostrils. Little details of the clothing. Those were all done in the plaster.
You said you could improve the bronze?
I had to actually work on the bronze. Yeah, you know the
How much can you
The
do
si-
that? I mean,
Hmm?
away on the bronze without destroying it?
well, you would use a grinding tool, a diamond grinding tool, that rotates, and you just press it against the bronze very carefully, and it takes away a small amount each time. And
It is what? Is it 3/8 thick?
it's what?
How thick is the bronze?
Oh, the bronze is about 3/8 inch thick. But when you're working on the bronze, you're just taking away, a fraction of a millimeter, just a tiny little bit. You certainly aren't making any real changes at that point. Yeah, neither.
How do you join the pieces together? You said
That's another question. I wonder how the ancient Greeks did arc welding. They didn't have arc welding, right? So how did they do that? I asked an archaeologist, and she said, they did it with pins and with with special fittings. Well, that's news to me. I don't know. And that looks, I could never find any of the joints on the bronzes that I saw.
But yours is just welded.
Welded, yeah, but they're welded, but did they have welds back in ancient Greece? But that's what they did. They had some way, mysterious, those Greeks.
God bless you, Betsy.
Was that fixed? Actually, it doesn't say Karen Lee, it says Gary Lee. Gary
Mary was sitting at the breakfast table this morning, picking out spots where she could be.
Oh, my gosh.
Problem.
Premonition.
Now you're gonna have Louis driving around.